Welcome to the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival, one of the world's largest and oldest Jewish cultural arts events. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all the years. I'm Rabbi Lila Haas, the Director of Adult Learning and Growth for the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and I am honored to be here today with Dr. Henry Panion from the film Dreams of Hope, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all for joining us. Henry, what a privilege and honor to be with you today to discuss this beautiful film, Dreams of Hope.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you today.
So the film is inspiring and powerful in so many ways, but before we sort of launch into a deeper discussion, I'm interested in what brings you here to this moment to tell this rich story. What moved you to show this story in film?
I think the most important thing for me, and I think I do say this in the film in part, is that having grown up in Birmingham and being fully aware of our history, it's sometimes we can look at the world from the inside out and not recognize and even empathize with similar plights throughout history. For example, I've always been aware of the Holocaust. I've always been aware of uh, all the amazing stories, some of the World War II films, some of the military films, war films, stories of Anne Frank. I mean, it goes on, even all the way through to Schindler's List. But it's so distant, isn't it, when you kind of look back at a film and look at a history and it's not part of your story. But being involved in this project just, I don't know, it just kind of just changed me in ways that I never thought imaginable. Having to do my research and having to just really recognize that, boy, there's these two stories that are going on in history and they're kind of similar. And so for me, I think when I was asked to get involved, it was indeed another musical project that I was undertaking. But having gotten involved, it really was life-changing.
I have a disclaimer. So I served as the associate rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Birmingham, Alabama, and lived there for 7 years and had the distinct privilege of serving the Jewish community there, and was overwhelmed by the relationships between the interfaith community, particularly where we were located in the South Side and close to downtown Birmingham, not too far from the 16th Street Baptist Church. And many an event and partnership within the community of trying to build these relationships to build one better Birmingham. As we were watching the film, those themes of hope, of resilience, of going from a place of darkness into a space of light really resonated. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you see these instruments and this music and this one particular program being a powerful bridge to that place of going from darkness to light.
Well, there was sort of a double entendre, almost a quadruple entendre, as it were. There were all of these symbols that were parallel. And these do not come out in the film, and it may very well be that your audience can look at this sort of like a little Easter egg, as it were. I don't know, so to speak.
Let's speak, let's tell
it. But when you think of the instruments and you think of their tragedy and you think of how they survived and how many of them were restored, you think about their owners. You can also think about the 16th Street Baptist Church itself, how it was once a beautiful relic that was destroyed, and now it's restored. But even more poignant, you can think about the four little girls who were beautiful relics that were instruments themselves.
Mm.
and that they were destroyed. And in this film, there is four individuals. There are two vocalists,
Mm.
there's the violinist, and there's the dancer, and they're all four females. And for me, they represent the four little girls.
Oh,
And that is
beautiful.
something that doesn't come out in the movie, but it was definitely something that was cognizant in my mind as to how I would represent that. So, when I talk about over tragedy and overcoming tragedy and triumph and all of those kinds of things. So to me, I think that that's an amazing parallel when you think about the lives. And that's kind of what I thought about probably every single day I was working on this film
Mm.
and writing the music for it too.
I found your process particularly moving. Your creative process of going from taking that week to be thoughtful and intentional to say, sure, this is an idea that is interesting and I'd like to participate, but I'd like to do it in a way that's going to be to honor the true nature of what the potential was. And you took that week and you were intentional and you studied and you immersed yourself. Can you talk a little bit more about what that process was like for you? Because I think, for so many people, it's yes, I'll participate, here's a piece of music, but it's so much deeper than that. And you touched on that in the film, but I think to even just unpack that process for us would be very interesting to learn more.
Sure. I think that for me, notes become kind of easy. And I've always been a student of a lot of different styles of music. But I think that there was a level of reverence
Mm.
here that was called for, and not knowing the history, and of course not being Jewish. Um, so I wanted to make sure that I was representing uh, musically what I should do, or some of the things that were important about the Jewish culture and your faith. Um, and I wanted to basically do that, first of all, but also to just really think about the instruments and think about what they could do, how they had been restored, to think about why certain ones were highlighted by Amnon Weinstein. Uh, and one of the interesting things, if you look in the film, there's a violin that we don't really talk about that's sitting center stage throughout the whole film, at least a part of it that's shot in the church. And that was the head violin that basically had been, the family flew in to see it because once they had turned it over to Amnon many, many years ago for him to restore it, they had not seen it.
Mm.
And they flew in from Toronto. He was coming in from Israel, and it was there that night. And we decided to put it centered in the concert, just to sit there. And they were so appreciative of that.
Mm.
So my process really involved listening to a lot of music, reading a lot of books, tidbits, some longer works, and even trying to identify music. Like, for example, in African American tradition, we always look at African American spirituals. We think about certain songs that may have been part of certain occasions, but whether it's a high holy day or a low holy day, whether it's a festive or commemorative, whether it's no whatever. So I want to be true
Mm.
in that sense. And then, to be honest with you, after getting all of that, the inspiration can only come to me after all of that has been taken in.
Mm.
So I have to feed myself, not really knowing where it's going to go. Just feed myself as much information that I can digest, as it were, to be able to then get inspired to produce.
Mm.
And so that's my process. And I mean, I have, we have theater in the house and films and screens everywhere. I mean, everywhere you go, everybody in the house will be subject to something, pertaining to that period in history, Not, so there you are.
Feel like this is a living, breathing history channel, this home. It used to be
Exactly,
our house,
exactly.
right? when the piece begins that you so beautifully composed, and it starts for those of us who sit in synagogue every year at the High Holy Days, when we rise and stand before the open ark and hear that melody of Avinu Malkeinu. What struck me hearing it this time in your piece was that Avinu Malkeinu, we stand open and vulnerable before God in this very holy moment. We're confessing our sins. We are hoping and praying to be inscribed in the book of life. But the words of Avinu Malkeinu are written in the plural form. Our Father, our King. We do this as a community, even though as individuals we stand open, vulnerable before God, but yet we speak with one communal voice. That really resonated for me watching this film, and also of your vision of having this performance in the 16th Street Baptist Church. There are beautiful venues in Birmingham where this could have taken place. The Alice Stevens Center is not far, the Performing Arts Center, where big musical hall. And you chose the 16th Street Baptist Church, and it was so perfect as you watch it now. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the why, and why did this feel like the right place for these instruments to be heard, for this piece to be premiered?
Well, I would like to take credit for that. I think that the Violins of Hope committee in Birmingham basically wanted to identify a place that would be perfect for starting the week. And through their discussing some of the venues, as you mentioned, and some of the other churches or synagogues and things like that, it just seemed perfect for the 16th Street Baptist Church, just because of the history. Maybe in other cities, perhaps there would not be any such meaning. But when you think about Birmingham's history, and I did not recognize how much of a tie-in there were to some of the civil rights movement and the Jewish community being involved in those civil rights movements. And so that civil rights movement. And I learned that in this process. And when you think about just the historical significance of the story, there probably isn't another story throughout history that is so parallel between the civil rights movement and the Jewish struggle. And we look at them as separate, but they really are one human rights story. It's the same story. And we may live it in different periods. We may go through it and experience these things in different points throughout our history, but it's the same one about humankind striving to have a better life for themselves here, and seeking eternal peace, and all the things I could say that are catchwords. But I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And then when you think about just the beautiful nature of that, and then all the people that evening, and then people talk about it to this day, that maybe perhaps never had there been a time when that diverse of an audience was brought together. Jews, Christians, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, atheists, heathens. Everybody was there. They're all God's children anyway at the end of the day. So
that's that communal voice, that communal aspiration.
Exactly.
How do you think, how has the film, which has done so well and has been shown at so many different film festivals now and is receiving accolade, how do you think the film has changed the conversation in Birmingham or in this event?
Well, one of the things I think that it's been a surprise. We decided to have a premiere, in one part because it's kind of cool to do a premiere, right? And some of the people from PBS and other places wanted to come in to see the premiere. And it was a cold night but the Alabama theater was packed. It was unbelievable the amount of people that came out to the premiere. Um, and on that very night, as opposed to having a glitzy premiere, we decided to do a roundtable discussion
Mm.
from community leaders right at the end of that premiere, which included the Hispanic community, the Indian community, uh, Christians, the African American community. Um, we decided to do that, civic leaders and others, so that people could see that we were really making an effort more than just having a film there. Now, going forward, it's been great to see some of the things that have happened. For example, when George Floyd was killed, shortly thereafter, I think within the next week, as it were, that mayor and our mayor were close, and there was a showing of our film
Mm.
uh, scheduled to bring the community together there in Minneapolis to talk about racial relations. So the film has been used in a number of different ways. It's been, uh, and I can't think of them all, but on university campuses. I know that I've spoke, believe it or not, to a large health forum. The several universities like Ohio State, I know, and I think there's a large consortium of vice presidents of inclusion and diversity at various universities. They're making the piece a featured piece in their national conference.
Wow.
So to see that, and then to recognize that film festivals from Prague to London to Paris to Amsterdam and all across this country have basically wanted to show the film and have their own discussions about that. And it may very well be in part because it's timely, if I can use that word right, with all that's going on in society now, that it may be um, a piece that could be used to further this cause of discussions.
Mm.
Because there's so many negative things that one can talk about when you look at all the tragedies of the world, and you can focus on that. But keep in mind the title. It's all about hope. It's all about what we can be, and we're not trying to discard or sugarcoat or hide the past. But through our tragedies, we all want the same thing at the end of the day, and we really are all the same people in many ways. And we need more people trying to say that. We have more in common, I believe, than the
Mm.
things that may divide and separate us. So that's been this journey. And as we now are celebrating the 1 year uh, anniversary of the film's release, it is amazing to see that even today, we've been asked in places that we're not even submitting the film to if they could show it, and it's winning these awards and recognition, becoming finalists. So if this message can go on forever and the piece can be a lasting piece that's used in education for education, then I think that I could go to heaven uh, feeling good that at least this work will be meaningful and can have some lasting impact on this earth.
Mm. Beautiful. Wonderful. So you said it's been a year.
Mhm.
So if you think about where you were a year ago and where you are now, what is sort of the one big surprise element, or what is the one big learning that you really hold in your heart after this entire experience?
Well, that's two different ways to look at that. I mean, uh, as an artist, we always like for our work to be recognized, right? Because I
Mm.
think in many ways, when one's work is recognized, particularly by your peers,
Mm.
it sort of means that, okay, maybe I've done some good work. And while I've had a chance to be a part of some films and movies and things like that in writing music, I've never been the director of one per se, so that's a whole new level of recognition. And I
Mm.
think that, when we were told by American Public Television and the folks at PBS that there had been no films they could think of that had won 13 Telly Awards. I'm going like, well, how do you measure that? I said, well, let me give you some benchmarks. And I don't want to call names, but they gave me some other films and some other directors that everybody would know. And they said, well, see, they only got these many. I said, okay, that's cool. And maybe that's what you're asking me. But I think that when I think about the year and I
Mhm.
look at the journey of this film, I look at even the Rotary International. I mean, I'm a Rotarian here in Birmingham, as you probably know, has one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. Um, and to recognize that everyone is touting the film in their own ways. They can use
Mm.
it for their own causes. And that's it. No one has to have ownership of it. Well, everyone can have ownership of this work. And 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 if anything stands out to me, again, and I think I'm trying to answer what you're asking, um, when I have comments and statements uh, from around the world about uh, how this film has meant so much to them, that probably does more to me than any accolade. So what we decided to do was we thought that we would have a couple of reviews that we would just kind of place, as you do on a poster. And but we ended up getting so many meaningful reviews
Mm.
from people that we went ahead and created a review page on the dreamsofhopebham.org site just to pull out snippets. And when you have someone to tell you that, tapped me on my shoulder in a concert I was in, and that was this short lady, and she said, I want you to know that this film has touched me so, and I lost my parents in the Holocaust. I
Mm.
mean, how do I how do I deal with that? How do I even know what to respond? And I wouldn't know how to, but the film does.
Mm.
And I've had from every race, from every creed, every socioeconomic status, from artists who are famous who reached out to me that I've been fortunate to work with over the years to tell me they've seen this film
Mm.
and how it has impacted them and how they're just sharing it, sharing it, sharing it. So when I look at these reviews, some days I'll just go to the page and I would just read some of these reviews and to take me back and then to take me forward too. So I hope I've kind of touched on what you were asking.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you had to just sort of think about, um, you said you learned so much about the Holocaust, about World War II, in this entire journey, and the instruments of being that one person, that individual, that soul, that spirit.
Mhm.
What was something that you learned in your own research and educating yourself about this, about the Holocaust and these violins, that really stays at the forefront of your mind?
For sure. One of the most important ones that hit home with me is the fact that there were all these musicians
Mhm.
that, were they not a fine musician, would have died. And that many of them, unbeknownst to them, were indeed fooled into thinking they were perhaps going off to a place that they were not going to, and only to get off of a train and to see some musicians there playing as they were getting off the train.
Mm.
And and yet, I mean, that image stays with me probably more so than anything. Just that recognition of seeing musicians having to play violin instruments standing in the snow. Probably not having anything. And so that stands with me. And there's even that parallels recognizing that many musicians who were African American who may have played for a plantation owner or something like that were only able to survive because they had something to give. They had something that people felt was of worth to contribute, that nothing else was valuable, that their lives alone weren't valuable.
Mm.
It was just what they could do, that they found value in that. So as a musician, that really, really stood out to me. And then my knowledge and learning more about how even Amnon's father, Moshe, who started the whole process of taking some of these musicians and bringing them out of Europe to Haifa, and places I've had a chance to conduct the Ra'anana Symphony Orchestra in Tel Aviv years ago, and thinking about that orchestra, as fine as it was, still there were Jews who were coming from places like Russia and other places in the world coming back to Jerusalem to form this fine orchestra. Well, that started when the Israeli Philharmonic first started, because some of these great musicians were coming back, and they were the finest musicians in Europe, but they were getting back to Europe, and then to Palestine at the time, but then to learn that influential people in history, such as Albert Einstein, uh, gave money to support some of these musicians and their plight to come from, to Europe, to come either to America or here. So, so I've learned a whole lot. I've learned a lot as a historian. I'm a music theorist by trade and by training. And so this is amazing, because one of the most famous orchestras to me was, the Israeli Philharmonic, and knowing some of the great conductors and some of the great violinists that have come, that played, and I hadn't thought about it before, and to think about great conductors like Zubin Mehta, and there's other things like that tied all this into me. And I've probably gone way deeper than anybody wanted to know, but
no, I think it's great. I mean, I think the passion comes it just exudes, which I think you travel your journey as well in the film, just as much as you're attached to each person in the film, as the audience. You're to each person, to the violinist, and she was magnificent, and each violin having its place, and that violin in the center, really, it pulls at your own heartstrings as you're sitting and watching. And the choir, the voices, it's just the dance. The whole element of that of the film pulls at you, and so that you can tell it's truly is a work of heart throughout the entire film. I remember hearing the violins for the first time in Birmingham, when they were at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, when we'd first met Amnon, and hearing the first piece at that time when they first came, they played Hatikva, Israel's national anthem, which means the hope, as you know, and those watching. And so to hear those instruments, which as I would close my eyes and listen, you hear the sounds of those voices of those people who were lost to us. And just as much as I do when I hear the choir singing in the church, representing the many voices who are no longer with us, because of tragedy, oppression, and injustice. So as we sort of bring our conversation to a close, I wonder, has your definition of hope changed as a result of this process, or how has hope taken on new meaning for you?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist.
Okay.
And I've been very, very fortunate that, even being an African American and growing up in Birmingham, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by people, my family, and even others who always looked beyond where we were in circumstances. When I saw the civil rights movement, and I was a little too young to kind of be involved in the civil rights movement when it happened in the 60s. But when we saw it on television, it could have been in any city, but our folks sheltered us there. And always with the idea of somebody in the world may have it worse than you. And if each one would reach out and touch one, that we might be able to make the world a better place for everyone. And certain things like, I mean, little does become much, you know. Uh, we say the phrase when you place it in the master's hand, but I think that um, little becomes much when we take our own hand to the plow and do
Mm,
a little work, you know. And so, and I think that I believe, in spite of it all, hope is an essential part of our existence. I mean, why do anything if we are not hoping for a better day? Why? Why? It can't be because of materialistic things. It can't be because of our own little uh, center of the universe, but it has to be because we are hoping for better society for all. So for me, it just, what it does is it gives me a charge
mm,
to continue to recognize that whatever platform we're in, we may only be able to reach within our own family, but if we can change the mindset or change the circumstances of just someone close to us, it doesn't have to be worldwide. That would make a big difference. So that's kind of where I am, and I can't say that it changed me as much as it may have given me some added fuel to continue to continue. And with all the attention Dreams of Hope has given, it's definitely given me an avenue, as it were.
That's good. That's great. In Hebrew, we have the phrase tikkun olam, meaning to repair this world. That is our charge, right? That our charge is to letaken et haolam, to physically repair the world, and that the world is these little tiny pieces, and we now are obligated to try and collect each of these pieces and now try to build the vessel back whole. Your film inspires us to do that. Your words and all of those involved incredible, what was a dream that became a reality now gives hope to so many. And we are grateful for this film, for you, for your music, and for your talent. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I want to thank everyone who was joining us today. And I want to thank you, Dr. Henry Panion from Dreams of Hope, for joining us again. And I want to thank all of you, our members, our sponsors, community partners, volunteers, film lovers, and the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support as our presenting sponsors. And thank you, our audience, for participating in the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.